You're too stupid to have a good time.
Welcome to Random Movie Reviews. I'm Nathan, and today I'll be talking about Roadhouse. No, not the 2024 remake with Jake Gyllenhaal that was utterly pointless and stupid, and nobody asked for it, and it's almost been completely forgotten about. So, yeah, that movie sucks. So in my last video, I talked about St. Elmo's Fire, a movie that I absolutely hate, but I did very briefly touch upon in that review that there are people who do enjoy that movie despite its many very obvious, sometimes egregious flaws, but regardless, they just find the movie to be entertaining, so the film could be technically categorized for certain people as being a guilty pleasure of some sort. And I figured, since I went on that movie pretty hard, it would be fair for me to talk about a guilty pleasure movie that I love, that other people may think is completely stupid, but I don't care because I just think it's so much damn fun, and that is the movie Roadhouse. Now, before I get deep into the review, I should probably clarify how I define guilty pleasure, because I think it differs from the literal definition and how some other people might define it. Do I feel guilty for enjoying any movie? Absolutely not. I feel like that's silly. Any movie that you watch that you love, regardless of what it is, you should be proud and open about it. Who cares? You know, people can like different stuff, and sometimes people can like fun garbage that we just enjoy, right? That's how I look at it. But as someone who likes to critique movies, analyze movies, break them down, look at them from a more analytical point of view, the way I would personally define a guilty pleasure is basically a film that has very obvious, egregious, just blatant flaws that for some reason or another I don't really care about, because the entertainment value I get from the movie in return just kind of trumps over those flaws, and maybe even sometimes comes back around and makes those flaws even more enjoyable to the film. That's how I would define a guilty pleasure. It's just movies that I know are flawed and dumb, but I don't care because they're just too much fun. There's a lot of movies that would fall in that category for me. I mentioned before, I'm a big Friday the 13th fan. I actually own the Shout Factory box set collection. And those movies are pretty much garbage, but I enjoy them very much. I'm a big fan of canon films. I think almost every single one of those movies could fall into guilty pleasure for me. Movies like Bloodsport, Cobra, Death Wish 3, Revenge of the Ninja, Ninja 3 The Domination, which I hope to do a video on soon because that movie is just too absurd to not talk about. These are all movies that are inherently flawed, but who cares because they're fun. And if I was forced to pick one guilty pleasure movie, one that is my all-time favorite that triumphs over all guilty pleasure movies, it would probably be Roadhouse. I have a pretty strong affinity for this film. Part of it is nostalgia. The other part of it is I just love action movies that are so absurd, but they don't know how absurd they are, and they're like super macho to the point that it feels like a parody. That's how I would describe Roadhouse, is that it's a movie that is so ridiculous that it feels like a parody of action movies, but it doesn't know that it's a parody of action movies, and that makes the movie even better. The plot of the film is pretty simple. You could almost say it's like kind of a twist on a modern Western kind of movie, where Patrick Swayze's character, Rick Dalton, is apparently a famous bouncer, which I didn't know famous bouncers existed, but in the world of Roadhouse, oh, they very much do. And Rick Dalton is the baddest of them all, right? He is hired to come into a new town and basically rebuild a bar, rebuild it in terms of reputation, in terms of security, and trying to make it a more snazzier, classier joint. But when he gets there, it's like a complete dive bar shithole nightmare. So he's hired to come into town to clean it up, and he ends up making some enemies along the way, finding a lover along the way, re-meeting with one of his mentors along the way, with Sam Elliott, who has never looked cooler in a movie. Of course, he ends up having to take on the big baddie of the town, where apparently cops don't exist in the world of Roadhouse either. Nobody can call the police for whatever reason. And the big bad character of Brad Wesley is basically like the town dictator. He kind of just takes whatever he wants. He does whatever he wants with no consequences, and nobody does anything about it. And there's a lot of martial arts scenes. There's a lot of people getting thrown through glass. A ton of people getting punched and kicked in the face. It's a very sweaty movie. Patrick Swayze, it gets oiled up quite a bit. There's some fantastic Tai Chi sequences as well. Of course, there's the iconic throat rip. There's a lot to admire about this movie in terms of entertainment value. This is a movie that you could technically pick apart for just being really dumb. I'll point out an example, okay? So most of the movie is about Rick Dalton cleaning up this bar, kicking people in the face, and trying to defeat the evil town warlord of Brad Wesley while also finding a new relationship with this hot blonde girl who just also happens to be a doctor. The film tries to give Rick Dalton a character arc, and this is hands down the funniest thing about Roadhouse in terms of like a story level. The film establishes kind of at the midway point of the movie that Rick Dalton was forced to kill a guy in self-defense by ripping out his throat. And he got into this situation because he was with a woman who was married and he didn't know about it. And the husband got mad and tried to kill him. And out of self-defense, Rick Dalton rips out his throat. This is shown again in the most iconic scene in the movie, the I used to F guys like you in prison scene, where Rick Dalton is forced yet again to rip out a man's throat, but this time it's in front of his lady love, who is very disturbed by this, and she ends up running away. And this is how, Dalton, this is his inner character turmoil that he has to triumph. This is the arc that he has to overcome by the end of the movie. So the movie, we get to the finale of the movie where Rick Dalton goes to Brad Wesley's estate, and he is straight up murdering people left and right, usually with a knife. There's just a lot of chaos and mayhem, and people are getting murdered along the way. And then finally we get the final showdown between Rick Dalton and Brad Wesley. It's very epic and hilarious, and there are spears getting thrown. And then, of course, Rick Dalton gets the upper hand and tries to kill Brad Wesley with his, eagle claw throat kung fu move. And then out of nowhere, his girlfriend shows up, which I don't know how she knew he was at the house and how she even got there. She just kind of happens to show up perfectly at the moment when he's about to kill this person, and her being there is supposed to influence him not to kill, because that's a bad thing to do. The movie's trying to have a message about how violence is bad, I think, despite the fact that he just murdered numerous people before then, but whatever. And so then he chooses not to, but then, Brad Wesley tries to kill Rick Dalton, but in the nick of time, the rest of the characters that have been very loosely established throughout the film show up at the final hour, and they all brutally murder Brad Wesley to death with shotguns. And then the cops show up for the first time in this entire movie, and I should establish that there was an explosion before this scene. There were numerous assaults, a lot of chaos and mayhem. Cops didn't care about that, but once a man got murdered to death with shotguns, that was the final straw. And so it's like the movie was trying to have a message about, Rick Dalton is better. He should rise above just killing this terrible person and be the better man. But then these characters show up and nah, you should have killed them, so we'll take care of it for you. Fucking kaboom! And they just shoot him to death. And I think about that all the time, because it's just so stupid that the movie was almost trying to have an anti-violence message, and then it's nope, violence ends up winning the day. And then the movie ends with our characters celebrating, and yeah, we killed the bad guy. And then he's with his lady love, who doesn't seem to mind that other people kill Brad Wesley, just as long as Rick didn't have to. And they swim and they kiss, and it's happily ever after. Do I need to say more as to why this movie is actually a masterpiece? I don't think so. I think I've laid out a pretty airtight case. And like I said, it is to me the best guilty pleasure movie. Speaking for myself, it's my all-time favorite. I watched this movie, I think I watched this movie unintentionally once a year. I just watched it a few months ago because I just love it so much. It's so, yeah, I felt like it was fair. I felt like if I ragged on one guilty pleasure movie, St. Elmo's Fire, then it would be fair for me to talk about a guilty pleasure movie that I love just to even out the table there. And so, yeah, I love this movie. Tell me, what are some of your favorite 80s guilty pleasure movies, or guilty pleasure movies in general? List them in the comments below. Let me know if you want to see me do more guilty pleasure film reviews. This is the first time I've kind of done that, and I had a lot of fun. So, yeah, as always, thank you guys for watching.